morning sun filtered through the hospital curtains, casting soft rays on Helen's face as she lay still in her bed, connected to a network of machines that beeped softly. The scene was peaceful, yet charged with palpable tension. The elderly woman, full of life and stories to tell, was now trapped in a state of coma, and each second seemed to drag on as if time had stopped. Claire, her only daughter, sat in a chair beside the bed, a worried expression etched on her face. The contrast between the vibrant woman she knew and the image before her haunted her. Helen had always been a force of nature, a woman who faced life with courage and optimism. Now, the fragility that emanated from her was a cruel reminder of human vulnerability. In the days following the accident, Claire struggled to cope with the pain of uncertainty. The phone rang constantly with calls from friends and relatives offering support, but deep down what she truly wanted was a miracle. The hospital had become her second home, and each visit tested her emotional strength. She remembered when she was a child, how her mother always encouraged her to be strong and face challenges with a smile. But now, the room was steeped in a silent darkness. Claire watched the machines, observing the blinking numbers. With every artificial breath her mother took, a new wave of despair washed over her heart. It felt like she was in a battle, but without any weapons to fight. The doctors were cautious with their words, explaining that the situation was critical, but Claire didn't want to hear it. The hope she held on to was fading, and uncertainty was beginning to give way to despair. As the days turned into weeks, Claire found herself consumed by dark thoughts. She couldn't help but let the desire to inherit her mother's fortune creep into her mind. The house, the possessions, the comfortable life she had always dreamed of. But at the same time, there was an internal conflict eating away at her. How could she think about inheritance while her mother was fighting for her life? Sitting there in silence, Claire began to wonder if she really knew her mother. The conversations they had shared over the years played like a film in her mind. Helen had always talked about the importance of helping others, of being generous and compassionate. And now, Claire found herself drowning in selfish thoughts while waiting for an outcome that could change her life. That morning, as the hospital lights flickered and people hurried through the halls, Claire made a decision. She needed to prepare herself for the possibility of losing her mother, and the thought of facing that reality terrified her. With tears in her eyes, she took Helen's hand, feeling its cold and pale skin, and whispered, "Mom, please come back to me. I need you." Time continued to pass, and Claire's life was on hold. A life full of promises and dreams, now filled with uncertainties. And as she clung to hope, a new chapter was about to unfold. One that would forever change how she viewed life and her relationship with the inheritance she so desired. The days in the hospital dragged on, and each visit to Helen became heavier for Claire. Uncertainty loomed like a dark cloud over her head, and anguish grew with every slow, artificial breath her mother took. As she watched Helen's frail figure, an increasing conflict settled in Claire's heart. The thought of inheriting her mother's fortune was not just a selfish idea. It was a desire that consumed her, a bright light in the midst of darkness. Claire began to daydream about what she could do with the money. A new house, renovations on the old one, trips to the places she had always wanted to visit. She pictured herself on a sunny beach, drink in hand, with the sea breeze caressing her face as life unfolded perfectly before her eyes. But frustration began to build, and the fantasies became a burden. Claire felt guilty for thinking this way. How could she dream of wealth while her mother fought for survival? The weight of this duality crushed her. She wanted to be strong and supportive, but the hopes for a better life intertwined with the pain of potential loss. Nights became especially difficult. Claire found herself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining what her life could be. Memories of her childhood with her mother began to surface. Moments of laughter, birthday parties, Helen's wise advice on how to be kind and generous. These memories served as a reminder of what truly mattered, yet the temptation to cling to the inheritance was strong. Amid this internal struggle, Claire began to feel isolated. Friends tried to comfort her, but their words often fell on deaf ears. No one seemed to understand the pressure she felt. the expectation of being the sole heir to a fortune that in some way felt like her right. With each passing day, her frustration grew, and she felt her life was at a standstill. Are you enjoying the story so far? Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this one. During a visit to the hospital, Claire observed other families around her, some laughing, others crying. Life went on for everyone while she felt stuck in limbo. The smiles of others were a cruel reminder that normalcy still existed, even as she stood on the edge of the abyss. Deep down, the idea of inheriting the fortune became a symbol of what she felt was at stake. One night, while walking down the hospital corridor, Claire came across a room displaying photos of children undergoing treatment. The mural showcased smiles, moments of happiness, and a phrase that read, "Together, we are stronger." This touched her deeply, and for a brief moment, she felt guilty for only thinking about herself. "It seems that life goes on even in the worst situations," she murmured to herself as tears streamed down her face. Claire realized she was trapped in a cycle of frustration and selfishness, and that her mother's life might have a greater purpose. If the fortune did come to her, what would it be if not a new beginning to help others? But the idea of setting aside her ambitions felt almost impossible. The weight of frustration crushed her, and the hope for a better future was turning into an internal battle that left her exhausted. With a confused mind and a heavy heart, Claire decided she needed to find a way to balance her material desires with her love for her mother. But how could she do that while her life was on hold? The struggle for the inheritance and the connection with Helen became increasingly intense as Claire sought a purpose that could relieve the burden she felt in her heart. And so, her journey was just beginning, with the hope of an outcome that could bring to light what truly mattered. As days turned into weeks, Helen's constant presence in a coma served as a daily reminder of life's fragility. But for Claire, this fragility began to blend with an increasingly dark obsession for the inheritance she was about to receive. The thought of losing her mother while gaining a fortune at the same time created a devastating internal conflict, yet the anticipation became a heavy burden she couldn't ignore. Claire spent hours at home poring over the documents her mother left behind, studying every clause of the will. She found herself daydreaming about what she could do with the fortune, investing in a new business, luxurious renovations to her home, or even a trip abroad, a getaway to escape the pain. But the more she thought about it, the more frustration and anxiety grew within her. In her conversations with friends, Claire began to show a different side. Instead of sharing her worries about her mother's health, she often shifted to the topic of the inheritance. "When my mom is gone, I'll finally be able to live the life I've always dreamed of," she would say with a smile that didn't reflect the sadness she felt inside. But as her words became more frequent, doubt and guilt began to accumulate. The obsession led her to make increasingly selfish decisions. In a moment of weakness, Claire decided to visit a lawyer to discuss how to expedite the inheritance process. "It's better to be prepared," she convinced herself. The idea that the lawyer could give her an advantage became a tempting thought. The consultation was just a step towards what she saw as her right. However, as Claire delved deeper into her plans, her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Money isn't everything, Claire. What matters is the love and kindness we cultivate." The words seemed to resonate, but she ignored them, convinced that her situation was unique. "She's not coming back to me," she thought, as a part of her became increasingly numb to the reality of life. Claire began to isolate herself, distancing herself from friends and family who tried to offer support. The pursuit of the inheritance became her sole priority, overshadowing everything she had once considered important. Conversations with others became superficial, and the pain over her mother's condition was replaced by a cold determination to ensure everything was ready for what was to come. One day, while walking through the hospital, Claire came across a family support room where people shared their stories and sought comfort. Hearing laughter and warm conversations, she felt a chill of discomfort. The interactions seemed so far removed from her own reality, where love was being stifled by ambition. With a fixed gaze, she quickly walked away, unable to bear the thought of emotionally connecting with others. However, a shadow of doubt began to grow within her. What would really happen if the inheritance wasn't what she expected? What if her mother decided to do something unexpected? These questions hammered in her mind, but Claire forced herself to push them away, convincing herself that what she wanted was deserved. The selfish decisions she was making were leading her down a dark path, and she knew she was drifting away from the person her mother had raised. The internal struggle intensified as Claire began to realize that her obsession was shaping a version of herself that she barely recognized. The lines between love and ambition were blurring, and the sadness over Helen's health was transforming into a dark plan of expectation. Her mother's life hung by a thread, and Claire found herself trapped in a dilemma that would lead her to a point of no return, where the true value of life could be lost forever. As Claire sank deeper into her dark plans, flashes of memories began to surface in Helen's mind, even in her comatose state. It was as if her life, filled with love and generosity, wanted to manifest in a moment of reflection, starkly contrasting with the coldness surrounding her daughter. The first image that appeared was of a young Helen, beaming with joy as she held her daughter's hand, who was no more than 5 years old. They were in a park, surrounded by colorful flowers and the laughter of playing children. Helen had dedicated herself to raising Claire with strong values, always emphasizing the importance of empathy and compassion. "What is worth more than money, my love, is the love we offer to others," she used to say while performing small acts of kindness for those around her. The scene shifted to a sunny afternoon at their home, where Helen had organized a community lunch. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers were invited to share a meal, and Helen's smile lit up the room. The smell of home-cooked food filled the kitchen as she moved gracefully and joyfully, chatting with everyone and ensuring that each person felt welcomed. Claire watched, enchanted, learning the importance of generosity from an early age. In another memory, Helen found herself at an orphanage, bringing toys and clothes for the children. The smile of a boy who received a new teddy bear illuminated Helen's face, and she felt the joy that comes from helping those in need. She hugged the boy, and the love she felt in that moment was intense and transformative. "These children need care and attention," she whispered to herself, aware that a small gesture could make a big difference. As these memories took shape, Helen also recalled the nights she dedicated her time to teaching children to read and write. The excitement in her eyes when she saw a child conquer a new word or phrase was unmatched. Those moments of connection were the essence of her life, and each interaction carried significant weight. In contrast, Claire, trapped in her ambition, viewed all of this as a distraction. To her, her mother's lessons about generosity and love had become empty words, overshadowed by the idea of inheritance and personal success. Each memory of Helen, which represented a life dedicated to helping others, now felt like a shadow of what she had become. Helen's mind continued to reflect on her life, each flashback bringing to light what truly mattered. She wished that Claire could see the value of generosity, that true wealth did not lie in material possessions, but in the connections formed between people. The legacy she wanted to leave for her daughter was a world where compassion and love were the greatest inheritances. And as these moments of reflection unfolded, a deep sadness permeated Helen's state of coma. She felt the pain of the disconnection between her and her daughter, and a silent plea emerged in her heart. May Claire find her way back to love and what truly matters, she thought, as the memories of her loving life enveloped her being. Thus, amidst the darkness of her coma, Helen struggled to convey a message that could transform not only her own life, but also her daughter's. The difference between the life she had lived and the plans Claire was cultivating was a deep chasm, and with each memory, Helen hoped that her daughter might awaken to the truth that life had always taught her. The morning was gloomy when the nurse entered the room, her face calm and somber. Claire was sitting by the bed, her mother's hand in her lap, feeling the coldness of Helen's skin. Claire's heart raced at the sight of the nurse. The tension in the air was palpable, an agonizing anticipation that knotted her stomach. "Claire," the nurse began softly, "I'm so sorry, but your mother passed away a few minutes ago." The words hit like lightning, slicing through the silence of the room. Claire froze, unable to process the reality. Time seemed to stand still as the meaning of that sentence sank in. At first, the pain of loss didn't come. Instead, a wave of relief washed over her, as if the pressure weighing down on her shoulders had finally lifted. She looked at her mother, now so silent and still. The machines that once beeped had stopped, and the peaceful expression on Helen's face was like a final farewell, an invitation to a long-awaited rest. Claire allowed herself to close her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to collect herself. The truth began to take shape in her mind, and an involuntary smile broke across her face. Finally, she could access the inheritance she had long desired. The dream of a life filled with comfort, the freedom to finally step out from under the shadow of illness and uncertainty, was within reach. No more worries, no more long hours spent waiting by a hospital bed. With renewed determination, Claire stood up, a new energy pulsing within her. The idea of inheriting Helen's fortune began to fill her mind, like a bright light in the darkness of loss. "I will finally have the life I've always wanted," she thought, as she began to plan what to do next. But meanwhile, an inner voice began to whisper. Claire hesitated, a chill running down her spine. What did this really mean? She had spent so much time imagining what it would be like to live with the inheritance, but the reality of her mother's death was starting to intertwine with her ambitions. However, she quickly pushed those thoughts away. "She wouldn't want me to suffer. This is what I deserve," she told herself, trying to convince herself that her feelings were justified. The pain of loss was just a shadow that would pass, and financial freedom was a future she longed for. As she prepared to leave the hospital, a nurse approached and, noticing Claire's presence, offered her condolences. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Your mother was an admirable woman. She always talked about how much she cared for you." Claire shook her head, the phrase echoing in her mind. The admiration for her mother was there, but the obsession with the inheritance was stronger. "She just wanted the best for me, and now I will finally be able to have that," she thought, feeling a mix of emotions. As she left the hospital, the reality of the situation began to sink in. The freedom she had always desired was finally on the way, but the price to pay was her mother's life. Claire looked up at the cloudy sky, feeling the weight of guilt blend with the anticipation of a new future. She was about to enter a new chapter, but what truly mattered? As Claire walked to the parking lot, she felt her internal struggle intensifying. Helen's death had brought a new reality, and the inheritance that seemed to be the answer to her frustrations could turn into something more complex than she had ever imagined. Life was about to change, but the question lingering in the air was, what kind of life did she really want to lead? The day of the will reading arrived, and Claire could barely contain the anxiety pulsating in her chest. Sitting in a stark conference room, surrounded by legal documents and lawyers, she felt as if she were on the brink of a new life. The cold white walls seemed to reflect her state of mind, mixing hope and nervousness. She looked around, observing the faces accompanying her, friends of her mother, some distant relatives, and the lawyer who had been appointed to handle the reading. The tension in the room was palpable, and Claire forced herself to take a deep breath, trying to push away the haunting image of her mother. The expectation that the fortune she had always desired was about to materialize kept her on edge. The lawyer, a serious man with dark glasses and an impassive expression, began to read the will, his voice echoing through the room. "We are here to discuss the disposition of Helen Thompson's assets," he announced, and each word felt like a drumbeat, resonating in Claire's ears. She could hardly hear what followed, her mind drifting between dreams of luxury and comfort. After a moment, the lawyer paused and looked at Claire, his expression serious. "Helen left a legacy of generosity and compassion. She always believed in the importance of helping the less fortunate." Claire felt a chill run down her spine, a dark intuition forming in her mind. "Did she leave me the house?" she thought, her hope stirring. But then the lawyer continued, "The entirety of Helen's estate, including her assets, will be directed to the Hope Support House, an organization that serves homeless children and vulnerable families." The words echoed like thunder in the room, and reality crashed down on Claire like an avalanche. Her heart raced, and her breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, disbelief mixing with anger. "She can't have done this." The lawyer, unfazed by her reaction, continued. Helen dedicated much of her life to helping those in need. She believed that true wealth lay in helping others, which is why she decided to allocate her inheritance to support the Hope Support House. Claire felt the ground crumble beneath her. The frustration she had built up over weeks turned into despair. "This isn't fair," she exclaimed, her voice choked with emotion. "She was my mother. I'm her only daughter. I should inherit all of this." The room fell silent, and Claire looked around at the faces surrounding her, some appearing sympathetic, others surprised. No one knew what to say, but everyone felt the weight of the situation. The lawyer watched her with a neutral expression, showing no emotion. "Claire," he said, trying to be gentle. "Helen made it clear that her wish was for the inheritance to be used to make a difference in the lives of children who didn't have the same opportunities as you. She wanted you to understand that true happiness comes from helping others." Claire's anger boiled, mixing with her pain. She felt betrayed and abandoned, as if all the years she spent preparing to receive that inheritance had been in vain. "She never cared about me. It was always about helping others," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. As reality set in, Claire began to reflect on the life her mother had lived, the generosity she had always shown, and the values she had tried to impart. Anger began to give way to confusion, and memories of Helen surrounded her like shadows. In that moment, something inside her began to change. The revelation of the will was not just a loss, but also a call to action. Claire was about to embark on a journey that would challenge her selfish ambitions and force her to confront the true essence of her mother's legacy. And so, as the lawyer's words echoed in the room, what seemed like an ending could actually be the beginning of a new understanding of what truly mattered in life. The revelation of the will hung in the air like a storm about to break. Claire felt anger pulsing through her veins, as if she were on the verge of an eruption. The lawyer's words echoed in her mind, but she couldn't process the reality unfolding before her. Frustration and disillusionment enveloped her like a heavy cloak, suffocating her. "How could she do this?" she whispered, her voice choked with despair. Tears began to slip down her face, mixing with the growing anger inside her. "She left me nothing but a lesson in charity that I didn't ask for." The looks around her were filled with concern and discomfort, but Claire didn't care. To her, it all boiled down to the injustice of the situation. As others watched her in silence, her world crumbled. She couldn't believe that all the years she had spent waiting for this moment had been in vain. The inheritance she had imagined was a symbol of security, of a worry-free future. And now, all of that had been taken away from her. Feeling increasingly isolated, Claire stood up abruptly. "I can't believe my mother chose to help strangers instead of taking care of her own daughter." The anger made her seem almost unrecognizable. The weight of abandonment hit her like a punch to the stomach, and the feeling of betrayal consumed her. As she paced back and forth in the room, she tried to find a logical explanation for Helen's decision. "She had everything and could have done so much for me. How could she choose children she didn't even know over me, her own daughter?" The thoughts unraveled like a tape, and Claire found herself trapped in a cycle of outrage and disbelief. Memories of her childhood began to seep into Claire's mind. The nights when Helen taught her about empathy, the moments when she spoke about the importance of helping those in need. But instead of feeling grateful for those lessons, Claire felt only resentment. How could her mother preach one thing and do another? She always talked about love and generosity, but what about me? I'm her daughter. Frustration turned into despair as she started to imagine the future. Without the inheritance, her hopes for a comfortable life crumbled. The promises of a new house, travel, and financial freedom were now out of reach. How will I support myself? Claire thought, her mother's voice echoing in her head, challenging her perceptions. She knew that no matter how much she wanted, she couldn't have it all. As her mind raced, something within her began to change. The anger that had dominated her was gradually replaced by a disconcerting confusion. She did this for a reason, Claire thought, doubt starting to blossom in her heart. But what could that reason be? The idea that her mother had a greater purpose didn't make sense at that moment. As feelings of despair and anger intertwined, Claire found herself facing an internal dilemma. The expectations she had built around the inheritance were crumbling, revealing a new layer of understanding. Deep down, she knew that what her mother was doing was a reflection of who Helen truly was, a woman who always put others before herself. "Why is this happening?" Claire murmured, her voice barely audible. The conflict within her was becoming an echo, a struggle that forced her to confront not only the loss of her inheritance but also her own identity and values. Claire's struggle to understand her mother's decision left her on the brink of a revelation that could change the course of her life. The pain of rejection mixed with the inevitable truth that she needed to confront her expectations and redirect her focus. What had once seemed like an end could actually be the beginning of a new journey in search of meaning and purpose. And so, with a heavy heart, Claire prepared to face the reality of a life that would demand much more than she had ever imagined. After the reading of the will, Claire found herself in a sea of contradictory emotions. Anger and despair began to dissipate, giving way to an uneasy curiosity. The support house, the Hope Support House, which her mother had chosen to receive her inheritance, was now becoming an inevitable destination. Even reluctantly, Claire knew she needed to see the place that represented not only Helen's legacy, but also the truth her mother had stood for throughout her life. So on a cloudy day, Claire drove to the support house. The journey felt endless, and each mile was a battle between her desire to go and the need to confront the new reality her mother had left behind. Upon arrival, she found a modest yet welcoming building surrounded by a colorful garden displaying vibrant flowers, even under the gray sky. As she entered, Claire was greeted by a warm staff who welcomed her with genuine smiles. The atmosphere was filled with children's laughter, and she heard the voices of kids playing a melody that seemed almost magical. But to her, the sound felt distant, like an echo that couldn't reach her heavy heart. The coordinator of the place, a middle-aged woman named Grace, approached her. "Welcome to the Hope Support House, Claire. Your mother was always a great supporter of ours. We have so much to show you." Claire nodded, trying to hide her hesitation. I am Helen's daughter," she said, her voice faltering slightly. "I would like to understand why she decided to leave everything here." Grace led her down a hallway adorned with photos from community events, showcasing the children who had received help. As Claire walked, she began to see the joyful expressions on the children's faces, and a feeling of discomfort started to settle within her. The truth was beginning to reveal itself, and the irony of the situation hit her hard. "This place is a refuge for children who don't have a home. We provide emotional support, education, and a safe space for them to grow," Grace explained, as she showed Claire the playroom, filled with toys and laughter. Helen always believed that every child deserves a chance. She wanted you to know that in such an unequal world, love and generosity can change lives. As Claire listened, the image of her mother, that strong and generous woman, began to take shape in her mind in a different way. She remembered all the times Helen encouraged her to be better, to look beyond herself. But for so long, Claire had been so focused on her own frustrations that she couldn't see what truly mattered. Entering a room where the children were gathered, Claire found herself surrounded by bright faces. The joy and innocence present there contrasted sharply with her own confusion. A little girl with curly hair and shining eyes approached her and handed her a drawing. "This is you," the girl said excitedly, pointing to a colorful figure on the paper. Claire looked at the drawing and felt a lump in her throat. The purity of that gesture touched her deeply. The child, who had likely faced unimaginable hardships, was there, full of hope and love. "Thank you, dear," Claire said, her voice trembling. "It's beautiful." In that moment, a wave of understanding began to wash over her. Claire realized that what her mother always stood for was not just a cause, it was a way of life, a means of connecting with the world. Helen's generosity was alive, vibrant, in each of those smiling little faces. What once seemed like an irreparable loss began to transform into something more meaningful. Claire felt a new determination growing within her. Her mother hadn't chosen to leave her inheritance to strangers. She had left a legacy that could help those in need, and somehow that connected her to Helen in a way she had never understood before. As the day went on, Claire started to realize that her struggle was not just about the inheritance she had lost, but about finding a new purpose. The support house was a reflection of her mother's love, and perhaps her path to healing was tied to this new reality. And so in that welcoming space, Claire began to see not only what she had lost, but what she could gain, a new way to honor her mother's memory and finally find a place where her heart could feel at peace. The days following Claire's visit to the Hope Support House were marked by a new routine. Determined to honor her mother's legacy, she began to visit the place regularly, dedicating her time to helping the children. The welcoming environment, filled with laughter and joy, slowly started to melt the layer of ice around her heart. With each visit, Claire got involved in activities, from helping with homework to playing games in the yard. The children, full of energy and dreams, served as a constant reminder of human resilience. One of them, a girl named Lily, had a smile so contagious that it brightened even the cloudiest days. Lily loved to draw and always asked Claire to help her color her creations. "You can be anything you want, you know," Claire told Lily as they mixed vibrant colors on a piece of paper. "You just have to believe in yourself." "I want to be an artist, just like you," Lily replied, her eyes shining. The innocence and hope in the girl's words made Claire realize how much she had lost touch with her own dreams. Life had become a constant struggle for money and status, while here with the children, what mattered was simply happiness and the expression of love. As she interacted with the staff at the support house, Claire also began to hear life stories that deeply touched her. Each staff member had a personal reason for working there, often sharing tales of overcoming adversity and showing compassion. Grace, the coordinator, shared how she had grown up in a difficult home but found her purpose in helping other children find their way. "This made me realize that what really matters is making a difference in someone's life, even if it's just for a moment," Grace said during an intimate conversation. "Life isn't about what we own, but about how we impact others." Grace's words resonated with Claire, echoing in her mind as she reflected on her own priorities. For so long, she had been obsessed with the inheritance, longing for the financial security she thought would make her happy. But as she looked at the children and listened to their stories, Claire understood that true happiness could be found in something much simpler, in helping, in giving love, and in creating meaningful connections. One afternoon, while helping the children prepare a snack, Claire had a revealing moment. A boy named Marco, who usually kept to himself, began to open up to her. He talked about his dreams of one day having his own home and a family. "I just want a safe place where I can be happy," he said, and his words cut deeply into Claire's heart. In that moment, Marco's pain reflected the internal struggle she had faced. She remembered her own life, filled with luxuries but also with loneliness. Realizing that she had spent so much time pursuing superficial things made her question her priorities. The life she had always wanted seemed insignificant compared to Marco's pure and simple desire for safety and love. As time went on, Claire began to feel more connected to that space. She saw how the Hope Support House had become a home for so many children, a place where they could dream and feel loved. The more time she spent there, the more Claire understood that her mother's true legacy was not wealth, but the compassion she had cultivated throughout her life. As she watched the children playing and laughing, a new determination started to take shape within Claire. She wanted to be part of the change, not just as an heiress, but as someone who truly made a difference in the lives of others. And so, as she grew in compassion, Claire was about to discover that the path to true happiness was far richer and more fulfilling than any financial inheritance she could have imagined. As the weeks passed, Claire felt her emotional transformation solidifying. The anger and despair that had once consumed her were replaced by a new resolve, a determination to honor her mother's legacy in a meaningful way. The Hope Support House had become more than just a place. It was now the stage for her reinvention. With the support of the staff, Claire decided to actively get involved in the activities at the center. What started as a casual visit quickly transformed into a genuine commitment. She began organizing events, from birthday parties for the children to art and reading classes. The sparkle in the children's eyes when they received a simple gesture of attention was the reward Claire didn't realize she needed. One afternoon, while preparing a painting activity, Claire remembered how her mother always valued creativity and expression. Inspired by this memory, she decided to create a collaborative mural where each child could contribute their own art. "This will be our special place, a reflection of who we are," she told them, and their faces lit up with excitement. The laughter and joy that filled the house began to fill the void Claire had felt for so long. Her conversations with the children were no longer just fleeting interactions. Each story she heard helped her connect more deeply with them and, by extension, with Helen's legacy. Claire realized that the happiness she had always sought was right there, not in the anticipation of receiving an inheritance but in the act of giving. Claire's transformation was reflected not only in her actions but also in her perspective. She began to see the world with new eyes, understanding that the love and compassion her mother demonstrated were far more valuable than any material wealth. In every laugh and every hug she found renewed purpose. What once seemed like a life of loneliness and despair was now filled with meaning. One morning, Claire organized a special event for the community, inviting local families and friends to visit the Hope Support House. With the help of the staff, she prepared snacks, decorated the space, and made everyone feel welcome. As she watched the children having fun, Claire felt a warmth in her heart, a connection that made her feel at home. At the end of the event, as everyone gathered in a circle to share what they had learned, Claire realized that she was finally living the values her mother had always cherished. "I am grateful for each of you," she began, her voice strong and full of emotion. "My mother always believed that every person has the power to make a difference. And today, I am here to honor that legacy." Claire's words touched everyone, and a wave of support and affection spread throughout the room. She felt she was reconnecting not only with Helen's memory, but also with the community, forming bonds that transcended pain and loss. The past had not disappeared, but it was now an important part of who she was, a woman choosing to live with purpose and compassion. And so as the sun set, Claire knew she was at the start of a new beginning. Her desire for inheritance had transformed into a call to action, and her heart was finally at peace. She didn't need material wealth to be happy. The true treasure lay in the connections she formed, in the lives she touched, and in the legacy of love her mother had left behind. With a smile on her face and the certainty that she was on the right path, Claire felt ready to face the future. The new chapter of her life was just beginning, and now, each day would be an opportunity to make a difference, honoring not only her mother's memory, but also the lives of the children who had now become part of her story. What would you do in Helen's place? Would you leave your entire inheritance to your children, or would you choose the path that Helen took? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you won't miss any stories like this one.